Hello and welcome to the Fragrant Divide. My name is Chris, and in this video, I'll be doing a fragrance journey Q&A tag video. I was kindly tagged by Miruna from the channel Liquid Joy, and I believe this tag originated from Carmen Centrix. So the first question is, how did you get into Perfume YouTube? Well, at some point in my late 20s, I reached that era when I wanted everything that I bring into my life to be something that I really like or love or me, if you will, and not just some temporary or practical crap to tide me over. Around that time, I was gifted a bottle of Hugo by Hugo Boss by a friend, and I wore that for a while. From what I remember, it was one of the most generic fragrances you can buy, and I only wear it when there's some sort of special occasion. I didn't like it at all, but it was a practical thing to wear because I have it. And back then I wasn't really like a perfume guy. So, it was handy, it was just there. So I used it. When I finally decided that I just don't want to put that fragrance on my body, that's when the Google searches started and I eventually ended up on YouTube. Number 2, who was the first person you started watching? Like most guys coming to YouTube search for men's fragrances, I most likely have watched Jeremy Fragrance first. He was unavoidable back then, and I think even today, he's still pretty much inescapable. Then, very quickly, I moved on to Steven from Adolescence and many other channels after that. Third question, who influences you the most? In the context of Fragcom, it would be without a doubt Persolace. He's the one who turned me on to Les Indemodables, Parlement Parfums, and his Soie de Parfum. He got me interested in the Guerlain Le Légendaire collection, as well as the Chanel L'Exclusif collection. He convinced me to finally revisit and explore more of Amouage, and many more. So yeah, watching Persolace can be expensive for me. When there's a new release, it's usually his opinion that I'm most excited about. I highly recommend his channel, so do check him out. Question number 4, whose taste is more similar to yours? There's really not one person, like most of the answers to this question from other people, there's really no one person that's very close to my taste. But the biggest overlap, I would say, from recent memory, is because we have a big overlap in our taste in freshies and green scents, it would have to be the channel Expands Floating. I will link his channel below. Number 5, when did you start wearing fragrances and which did you wear growing up? For the most part, I didn't wear fragrances growing up. When I was 13 or 14, somewhere around that age, the in thing with my friends and classmates were body sprays from a company called Bench. And it's a local clothing company in the Philippines, which is where I grew up, by the way. Similar to maybe Gap, Lacoste, or Tommy Hilfiger. I remember there was a body spray called H2O and another one called Atlantis. I think they were both fresh aquatics, fairly generic, but I remember back then that they were actually quite nice. During my university days, I gravitated towards CKB. I was a big fan of Calvin Klein back then, and when I eventually moved to the US, I picked up CKB again. And I wore that for quite some time until I ran out of it. And then that's when I received the Hugo Boss one. Number 6, do you wear fragrances to bed? Yes, I do wear fragrances to bed. Either something that I'm testing, something I'm suddenly craving, or something that just randomly pops up in my head. Sometimes there are just scents that you remember out of the blue from your memory. And most of the time I can't figure out what they are. But when I do, that's usually the scent that I tend to wear to bed. For example, last night I wore Earl Grey and Cucumber by Jo Malone. And it's a pretty good Earl Grey bergamot tea scent. And tea scents are probably one of the best things to wear to bed because they have these relaxing properties. Number 7, if you could only keep 3 fragrances without thinking too much, which would you keep? My three would be Tuscan Leather by Tom Ford, Un Jardin en Méditerranée by Hermès, and Angelique Noir by Guerlain. The first two, I didn't have to think about that at all, but the third one was a bit of a struggle. Number 8. What is the worst fragrance you've smelled or purchased? Well, recently, the worst that I could remember has to be Ensalade by Marc-Antoine Barbois. I didn't purchase it, I just sampled it, but there was something about the combination of vetiver and the Akigala wood, maybe, or something else. But it was just so gross and aggressive, and it felt so rough and sharp with this kind of like plasticky, woody type sweetness that it was quite sickening. It was quite sickening. Number 9. Do you like blind buying? Why or why not? There's something to be said about the thrill of blind buying, and I do like that feeling, but I eventually found that sampling is just much more enjoyable to me. So I rarely blind buy anymore. I still blind buy releases from specific collections that I try to complete. Number 10. What are your top 5 fragrance notes? My top 5 would have to be galbanum, raspberry, elemi, suede, and cashmere. Number 11. What are your least liked notes? I find that I do not like Akigala wood at all. I do not like it in Delina, Ensalade, Bois Imperial, although I do like Bois Imperial, but only for like 10 minutes and then I'm sick of it. Number 2, some form or concentration of synthetic coumarin. Number 3, excessive amounts of ambroxide. Number 4, I actually don't like most sandalwoods. It has to be just like the creaminess of the sandalwood, and I also do not like it on its own. And I only really like it if it's because sometimes sandalwood just lends a texture and not necessarily a smell. And that's really the only time that I'm good with sandalwood, or if I don't smell it at all. Number 5 is I really do not like most forms of vetiver. I know it's in almost every fragrance that you can buy, but there's something about vetiver that just does not sit well with me. Number 12. If you could bring back one discontinued fragrance or formulation, which would you bring back? I would have to bring back the original formulation of Confessions of a Garden Gnome by Ford and Manley. This has been on my wish list for the longest time, but when I finally decided to get a bottle, it was sadly a reformulation, and it was just not good at all. If I had known that it was reformulated, I would not have wasted money on it at all. And it's actually weird that after a few months of getting the bottle, the brand basically discontinued Confessions of a Garden Gnome and other fragrances from their line, and then they completely rebranded. Like to me, that just killed the brand for me. So yeah, Ford and Manley is dead to me now. Number 13. Do you have a signature scent? As far as having a fragrance that my friends associate with me, no, I do not have a signature scent. My friends, for the most part, are not really perfume people. If I really have to pick one, the closest would have to be Un Jardin en Méditerranée, just because of how much and how often I wear that one. And last question. What is the best fragrance on the opposite sex? To answer this question as is, I'm not really sure what's sexy on a woman, so I picked something slutty, and I mean that in a good way, something demure, and something in between. For my slutty pick, I would say La Fille de Berlin by Serge Lutens. I imagine this to be what Angelina Jolie would wear in that movie Mrs. Smith when she was wearing when she was out to seduce and assassinate a target, and she was wearing like a very sexy, maybe like leather and latex outfit. It was like a thigh-high boots kind of situation. For the demure choice, it would have to be Poupra d'Automne by Maison Violet. I think everybody needs a good iris in their collection, whether it's something very demure like my pick. It's just very classy. It's an iris, kind of like a waxy iris with a slight fruity undertone, But there's also something like Iris Torrifier by Guerlain. That kind of sexy. For something in between, I'd go with Angelique Noir by Guerlain, with that combo of bitter Angelica and very sexy but very classy take on vanilla. If the question refers to the sex that I'm attracted to, in my case, it would be a fragrance for a man. So my picks would be the original Armani Code. I don't know when the reformulation happened, but my bottle is from 2016 and it's really quite good. And so anything 2016 and older would be a good version to get. It just has the perfect balance of spice, sweetness, and suede leather texture to it. Another one would be a good fougere, especially ones with a little bit of a twist than the typical traditional fougere, like for example Endymion by Penhaligon's, which is a fougere, a traditional fougere, but it's paired with coffee and a slight gourmand edge. So on skin, it's kind of like a mix of that fougere and gourmand, and it's just very sexy. Or a slightly unusual amber like 8 and Bob's 8 and Bob Original. I know everybody hates this for the marketing JFK tie-in, but despite all of that, I find it to be really sexy, especially when it dries down, because the first few minutes of it is really kind of screechy and intense, but when it dries down, it's such a good, like semi-delicious amber, but it's quite unusual. It's not your typical. There's definitely some sort of like mature notes used in there. I would have to look it up. So those were the questions if I didn't miss any. To keep the tag going, and since I only have a handful of followers, I'm basically tagging all of you. But also, I want to specifically tag some channels that I have been enjoying lately. And they're the ones that are currently featured in my channel's homepage under the small/new channels I'm currently enjoying. So I'm tagging Devilish Scents, Quick Fragrance Reviews, Fragrance Fiend, Zam Bowman, Teal is a Scent, Dina Fragrance, Sassy Dragon, Wendy from Wendy's Parade of Perfumes, Alex Pearl, Expanse Floating, Milos or Mild Scents, Nose Candy Fragrance, and Zest for Life. I hope that was entertaining in some way, and maybe you've gotten a glimpse of my taste in perfume. Again, I want to thank Miruna from Liquid Joy for tagging me, and as always, thank you for watching.